The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
I feel that everything that I knew, the Venezuelan only that I grew up with, how that deteriorated over time, it completely destroyed my future. It completely destroyed my family. The notion of a family, the notion of what you have, it was absolutely destroyed in less than a generation. From what, for example, my mom built in Venezuela, which was amazing. Venezuela, I actually lived in the 70s and 80s, was amazing. But the thing is, like in Venezuelan history, right before my mom, in the 50s, we have another dictatorship. So do I want my kids to go through that? Absolutely not. So the moment I came to the US, I knew that the person I was left back in Venezuela. And I basically was reborn when I came here.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an Ironclad original. I am your host, Vincent Vargas. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking with Andres and Jorge, two Venezuelan asylum seekers here in America currently fighting for their chance to help others find freedoms here in America. They are activists, or should I say, they were activists in their own country until they had to fight against their own persecution, and were fortunate enough to find fellowships and opportunities here in America while they petitioned for their own asylum. The country of Venezuela has been at the brink of social and economic collapse for many years now. Under the socialist regime, followed by the president, Nicolas Maduro. This has caused a lot of chaos in the migration of Venezuelan migrants coming to America. The massive influx of Venezuelans in recent years is all due to that. Today we have with us two very strong freedom activists who speak against the president of Venezuela, and they give us a deeper insight into why they are fighting against communism and why they are against socialism. Here's our conversation. I haven't got to dig deep into Venezuela and some of the issues that are happening in the country, and so I'm excited to dig deeper into that and some of your perspectives on socialism and everything else. But if you don't mind, one at a time, we'll start with Jorge, if you don't mind. Introduce yourselves and who you are, and so then after that, then the audience will know exactly who we're talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation, Vincent. Well, my name is Jorge Galicia. I came from Venezuela about 5 years ago, almost 6 already. And back there, I was a political activist. I was, rooting for the return of democracy, of republicanism. We have a horrible dictatorship down there, a socialist Marxist dictatorship. I graduated from law school back in Venezuela, so technically I am an attorney back there. And sadly, I have to say I also suffered political persecution, which is pretty much the main reason I'm here right now. I needed to claim asylum because of my belief and because of my activism. I was persecuted down there in Venezuela. I almost went to prison. And ever since I arrived, I've been speaking against socialism because sadly, a lot of young people here in the U.S. have favorable views of socialism, and I cannot stand that. So, that's a little bit of my background.
First of all, thank you for having us here, and thank you for your whole audience on this very important subject. I was born in Venezuela, in Caracas, the capital of the country. I came here 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago. And before coming here, studied in the international relations in the Central University of Venezuela. While I was doing that, I was also involved in politics. I was president of my student government, which led me to, be involved in every single one of those videos that you saw, especially in 2017, of students protesting against, a bunch of tanks and against police officers. I was right in the middle of that. That led me with issues with people that you shouldn't have issues in places like Venezuela. So in 2019, I got one opportunity to do an internship here in the Cato Institute. And while I came here, I was also being threatened. So the colectivos back in Venezuela, they told my mom that we don't want your son back here in Venezuela. He should stay there in the U.S. And well, I listened to that because that's when they mean that, they actually are saying it for real. So since I've been here in the U.S., like Jorge, we were part of a project called Venezuela Project with the Fund for American Studies. We traveled all around the country. I went to 35 states around the country, giving the message of not only what socialism is, but also what is the struggles of people that have to go through socialism and what will be the consequences if something like that happens in the U.S. And currently I also work in politics as a Republican strategist.
I've seen a lot. So I've seen a lot of, Venezuelans coming across the border currently right now and seeking asylum because of what's happening in their country. And it was really sad to watch on TV and the news. It's just massive protests and massive, political issues going on in there. If you guys don't mind, for the audience, explaining what recently happened in the country and why we've had such a massive influx of Venezuelan immigrants coming across. It's something that I don't think a lot of your average person here in the United States understands.
I think people have to understand that what happened in Venezuela is exactly the same thing that happened in socialist Cuba or in the Soviet Union or in communist China when it was, strictly speaking, communism. Right now, basically the government started to confiscate private businesses all over Venezuela. They started to put in place a lot of price controls. They started to respect private property rights, and that led to a scenario that led us to a horrible economic crisis where people were or are right now starving all over the streets. Poverty grew. I think we reached already 80 or more % of the population live under poverty, and more than 50% live under extreme poverty right now. It's a really, really desperate situation. And not only the economic side, but you also have the political side where if you start protesting against those things, like me and Andres, well, you're going to suffer, political persecution and retaliation from the regime down there. So it is actually really easy to understand why so many people are trying to desperately leave. More than 7 million people have already left the country. Probably the number is higher than that. I have to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that we already surpassed the Syrian migratory crisis as the biggest one right now in the entire world, and not a lot of people are talking about that. But yeah, people are just running away from bad policy decisions, really corrupt and Marxist government, and I think we need to make that abundantly clear to the American audience, because sadly there are a lot of people out there that are claiming that this is all thanks to U.S. sanctions, or this is all thanks to the Trump administration or stupid things like that, and that's not the case. The case is that we're running away from a really, really bad dictatorship, authoritarian dictatorship, Marxist dictatorship, and we're suffering the consequences of following the wrong ideas.
Yeah, Andres, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Just to add for what Jorge said, the perspective of an immigrant. There is a lot of talking out there, not only now, but from many years ago, that people come here through the border as an economic migrant. And sometimes that might be true for the small minority, but the huge majority of people is people that are facing very harsh realities in their countries. Not only in Venezuela, which is our subject right here. We saw it in Salvador before Bukele took power. We saw it in Guatemala, in every single one of those countries where people have daily to make decisions. Do we feed our children, or do we buy eggs? Do our children get to go to school, or they have to join a gang? In Venezuela, do you have to eat from the streets? Because most people have seen those videos of little children eating garbage from the streets. So it's a bunch of decisions that lead people to a desperation where, do I stay in this hell that is reality, or do I go somewhere? So the U.S. is a destination. Colombia is the biggest destination for refugees from Venezuela, where you see people making the trip all the way down to Chile, to Argentina. People that had the means go to Spain because there is a huge Venezuelan community in Spain. But you just try to find any place that you can. Now, the case with the U.S. is a very particular case on what has been the struggle of Venezuelans coming here in the last months, and this shift that we're seeing in the perception of what the actual kind of Venezuelans that are coming here. So I think that we're going to dig deep on that. But what became many years ago as a strictly humanitarian perspective of the Venezuelan migrant right now is shifting to a more crude and raw reality.
You mentioned it, and I wasn't going to get to this early in the interview, but I think while we touch on it, let's get into it. Jorge, you talked about, a lot of people talk about how America is part of the reason why Venezuela has fallen or has become the country what it is today. I don't understand it enough to even have an argument with that, but I would love to hear what you know of that argument and why people are saying that, because I have friends who are Venezuelan, and they work in the industry, and they were saying, like, they were very frustrated because they believe that this country is the reason why all the issues are happening, and I didn't understand that. I don't know, and so I'd love, if you don't mind, explain that to me a little bit, where that comes from.
I'm gonna say, listen, a lot of people say that the reason why Venezuela is doing this bad is because of hard economic sanctions against the oil industry and against the financial sector in Venezuela. We have to remember that when Donald Trump took office, he started, Venezuela was part of his, what was a big priority for his administration to his foreign policy agenda. And he started imposing a lot of sanctions to try to add pressure to the Maduro regime to try to help us to recover democracy, right? So for example, he avoided, he forbidden Maduro to put Venezuelan debt in the American market. He stop American industry for buying Venezuelan oil. And that's like the main argument that these people make, like, hey, well, thanks to these decisions coming from the US, is that Venezuela is doing this bad. But we have to remember that this never happened before 2016. And this horrible economic crisis that I'm describing right now started at least in the year 2013 and 2014. That's when we started to see this big scarcity in the marketplace. Services like electricity, water supply, internet connection, all of that started to slowly disappear. And there was not a single sanction against the Venezuelan economy during that day. Actually, if you start looking, if you pay close attention, you're going to realize that after U.S. sanctions, something incredible happened in Venezuela. Is that, and this is like, Maduro he needed more money because of the U.S. sanctions, and he decided to start staying away from most of the Marxist policy that he put in place in the first place. So thanks to that, he made some reforms, small, but they did make a little bit of sense. He removed all of the price controls. He actually returned some of the private properties and private businesses that they confiscated in the past. He returned some of that to their previous owners. So we saw some sort of a little, nothing spectacular, but a little economic comeback after U.S. sanctions. So you could even make the argument that Venezuela is doing economically a little bit better after the U.S. sanctions. So it is not true that the suffering and all of this chaos that we're seeing is thanks to sanctions. It's actually thanks to socialism and thanks to really, really bad policy decisions in Venezuela.
So Andres, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So to expand on Jorge's comments, so the main argument usually is that, in the case of Venezuela, which is the case of every sanction system, you have the broad sanctions in Venezuela's case against the oil industry, against imports, against exports, and against the industries itself. And then you have the individual sanctions against Maduro, Diosdado, all the members of elite, Chavista elites. So no one can make an argument that any individual sanction is bad because they target specific actors inside the criminal system, and they need to be targeted. There is a bounty on the head of every single one of them. And then you have the broad sanctions, like Jorge was saying. The effects of the downfall of Venezuelan economy happened way before the very first sanction that happened under the Obama administration in 2013. The Venezuela downfall way before that. So a lot of people make the argument, well, that was in 2013. Right now, the industry has been so damaged because of the sanctions that you find Venezuela is in a position where, it can't import to the U.S. or it can't do X or Y or get food or medicine. And all of those are fallacies. That is not happening. One of the sanctions in Venezuela is that it pushed Venezuela towards an international black market, which is what you have in the allies of Venezuela: Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, and X and Y. So the main problem that we have right now is that when you do sanctions in a different time, will be only that country that had sanctions, like the sanctions that we put in Russia many years ago, the ones we put in Iran. When you do sanctions today, you're just moving that country from the economic interest from the U.S. into someone else's interest. So when you go to a supermarket in Venezuela, you will see products that are from Iran. You will see products in the supermarket that are from Russia. You will see people getting a box of food that has food from Mexico, has food from China. So one of the main effects of the sanction is just that created Venezuela even more dependent on the people that we don't want it to be dependent. So there can be an argument that the sanctions have expired, at least in the way they have been implemented so far, because they haven't been reformed since many of them took place, some of them in 2019 under the Trump administration. And we see Biden recently laxing many of those sanctions, mainly because we needed oil from Venezuela, because we didn't get the oil from Europe after the Ukraine war. So it's a chain of very bad decisions in how to understand how sanctions have impacted Venezuela. But again, the sanctions are not the reason why Venezuela is the way it is. Venezuela is the way it is because the regime destroyed Venezuela before the sanctions. And if anything, the sanctions are just a narrative that the regime uses to be ineffective and to steal money. And when something bad happens, they just say, well, it's the sanctions. Well, they know it's not the sanctions. But of course, that narrative permeates along many of the masses.
When you say the regime, who are you referencing when you talk about the regime?
Well, basically, it's Nicolás Maduro, who is the dictator, but he's not like alone in power. There is a whole group of people that surrounds him. For example, his wife, Celia Flores, is someone who has a lot of power in Venezuela. You have the second most powerful guy in the government structure, who is Diosdado Cabello. He's also someone who has a lot of power. I would say that probably the regime, as I call it, is a reunion of different factions of different groups that have like the same common goal. Sometimes there are some inside fights that allegedly that they happen, but yeah, it's not like a single guy who controls every single thing. It's a small group in Caracas that has a lot of power, and they take all of the bad decisions that we're seeing in Venezuela. Maduro is like the main face, but there are some other surrounding him that also have a lot of power.
You mentioned the same goal. What's the goal? What is the underlying goal that they're even trying to do that's destroying this country?
Just remain in power forever, be as rich as they can by, stealing money from us and doing corrupt businesses and doing money laundering and producing drugs in Venezuela. That's their whole objective. That's social control and remain in power for as long as they can.
And not go to prison. Let's remember that staying in power means you don't go to prison. And if they were in power, every single one of the members of the regime, not only because of the actions they have made inside the system, but let's remember that there is a whole drug cartel run by this regime, by the military in Venezuela. So these are a bunch of criminals. If they were not in power, they will be in prison right now. So remaining in power and doing everything they can to keep it is also a way to not be in prison, because that's where they go when they lose power.
What are some of the consequences that someone in Venezuela would suffer or face if they speak against them, if they protest, something like what you guys would be doing in activism?
Well, there are many. Jorge can expand on that too. But, the first one is that and speaking out, let's define speaking. Speaking out can be saying something in your class in college, can be saying something in social media, can be even saying something to a neighbor, and it turns out that neighbor works for the government, and now they know what you said. So it can mean many, many things. And the thing is, like, once you do something, you start feeling that you're being watched. Not only watch where you live, but where you work and what you do on social media, what you don't do on social media. You start fearing for yourself. You start fearing from your family. That's why many, many activists, Jorge and many others, and me included, leave the country, because that's one way that not only they don't target you, but they don't target your family too. So it's like a tribute. I leave the country, you guys don't touch my family. But the consequences when they actually get to you is what we have seen with the political prisoners in Venezuela. There are many, many horrible cases, for example, of people having the genitalia electrocuted, having, for example, members of the military that spoke out There is this famous Navy guy that he got hanged by his ankles into one room until he, started losing conscious. They show him videos of his dog being mutilated so they can break his mind. And that happens to not only military defectors, but it happens to high school students, happens to college students, happens to everyday business owners. It happens to anyone that either says something really bad that the regime doesn't want you to say, or you get in trouble with a specific member of the regime. Can be anyone. It can be the low military member in your corner. But it turns out that you're getting a problem with him, and he's going to call his buddies inside the regime, and they're going to take you to somewhere and torture you. And to the point that if you see the testimonies of the people that had either been blessed to leave the prison in Venezuela, is that they wish they just die. It's a point where you would rather die than to keep being under the torture that they put you.
Jorge, you have anything to expand on that?
No, I think Andres explained it very clearly. The consequences could be from, maybe receiving a monetary fine, or maybe something really bad like going to prison, or even just being shot dead and being killed because of your political opinions. That's we were just in February the 12th. We were commemorating in year number 10 from some massive protests that took place in Venezuela in the year 2014. In these protests, more than 100 students died because of their political expression and because of their political activism. They were in the streets peacefully protesting, and they were executed in the middle of the street by criminals supporting the Maduro regime. So yeah, it's really, really dangerous to be politically involved and politically active in a place like Venezuela.
And Vincent, if I can add a little bit more, if we all saw the news of what happened in Chile last week, a military from Venezuela that was exiled in Chile for many years ago, he got kidnapped by members of the intelligence unit from Venezuela in Chile. First, people thought that they just did it rogue, but it seems like there are more information coming that the Chilean government allowed these intelligence units to operate in Chile. And that's just not an isolated case. Let's remember, the criminal enterprise that the regime of Venezuela is an international criminal enterprise. The reach that they have goes all the way in Latin America. And what we don't want, for example, is that happens here. We've seen many of those criminals that have started to come through the southern border. And there will be no time until they start getting orders directly from the government to take care of people that are here saying stuff that they shouldn't against the regime.
It's reminiscent of movies, of the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is like insane. You see movies and you read books that are like this, and you don't think it's a reality. It's crazy because here, from my position, I watch a lot of news. I read a lot of information. I've never heard this. I saw the protests, and I thought it was pretty cool to see a country stand up and protest for what they believe in. I love seeing that. But to know that there's a case 10 years ago where 100 students were massacred in public, that blows my mind. Those are things that the rest of the world doesn't, for some reason, get the opportunity to see and hear about as much as it happens. And it's why is that, right? Why are we not know this information? And then why do we have a country where so many people fight for socialism? So many people want socialism, and is this what socialism is? I don't know. The only example I have is from what you guys are explaining to me. And it's terrifying to think of. Are you guys personally afraid for your own lives? The fact that you speak out on this and you're so public about it?
Listen, what happened like a week ago or so in Chile was a demonstration that even if we are outside Venezuela, we're not safe. This was a military member who escaped Venezuela. He was actually before he used to be a political prisoner who was somehow released, and he escaped to Chile. And we don't know what he was doing in Chile, but probably he was doing some work in Chile, trying to put together some sort of movement against Maduro. I believe in that because apparently this was a really patriotic military member who was heavily opposing the dictatorship down there. And he probably believed that he was pretty safe in a country like Chile, where you have democracy, you allegedly have functional institutions. But then, well, we saw this kidnap executed by Maduro's intelligence in a foreign country. So that makes me think, well, is that possible to happen here in the U.S.? It's a scary thought, but it looks like it is possible. And not only that, but we are also seeing how also the Biden administration, unfortunately, they have been removing a lot of the pressure against Maduro. Maduro's nephews were in prison here in the U.S. for being involved in some narco traffic, crimes. They were paying a sentence here, and he was those guys were pardoned by Biden, and he sent them back to Venezuela. The biggest money launderer for Maduro, and a guy named Alex Saab, he was also being there was a trial going on against him because of all of these money laundering activities and all of the corruption deals that he took. And he basically was also pardoned by the Biden administration, and he was sent back to Venezuela. So Biden has been really, really soft, on Maduro, and we don't know. Maybe if he actually requests someone like, "Hey, this guy, he's speaking too much against me. Can you do something for me? Can you deport him? Maybe I don't know." So it's crazy because we're seeing a lot of criminals pouring in through the southern border, but people who actually should be being held here are being sent back. We saw another military member here in the U.S. who claimed asylum. I do believe that he had a strong claim for asylum, and he was denied and he was sent back. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of criminals just basically walking through the southern border and doing whatever they want. So, for sure, it's a scary time to be Venezuelan and to be part of the opposition, even if you are abroad outside the country.
Yeah, it sounds intimidating. And recently, I just want to mention that Venezuela recently halted any flights of deported migrants from the U.S. and Mexico. And that's interesting. Like, why did all of a sudden Venezuela decide to do that?
What the argument that they're making is that there has been negotiations for many months ago between the regime, the opposition in Venezuela, and you have the U.S. as intermediator. They have something called the Barbados Accords, which is many of these people went to Barbados. They have meetings where, hey, let's set a date for a presidential election in Venezuela for 2024. Let's make it fair and squares. Let's have international people come see how it's going, how it's happening, international witness. So they're claiming that because the opposition is not following the accords that were in place, and the Biden administration is not following the accords, then they are withholding any deportations towards Venezuela. But at the same time, that's what they're saying. What we really think is happening is that, like anything the regime does, they find an excuse for the narrative, but in place, they know that they don't want people to come back to Venezuela because they want that chaos that is happening in the U.S. Anyone that is against the U.S. wants what is happening in the southern border of the terror that is happening not only in the border states, but it's starting to happen across the country. Maduro is having a blast, just like anyone else that is against the U.S., of what is happening. So he's not going to say, of course, I'm going to help you, send me everyone back to Venezuela. The more they can stay here, and not just to stay here, everyone that came, but the bad apples, like the one we saw here in Georgia that killed a college student, the bad apples, these are the ones that they don't want to send back. Because there's a lot of theories, but they are very, very well evidenced that in Venezuela, there was a big operation a couple months ago. Jorge can correct me if I'm wrong on the date. But they entered many of the prisons in Venezuela. And if you saw the New York Times or was a Washington Post report today on how prisons are operated in Latin countries, you know that the police have no say in that. It's their own prisoners that run the prisons. So in Venezuela's case, all the prisons were run by the gang members, by leaders inside. You will get, they will direct kidnapping operations from inside the prisons. They will do ransom, everything from inside. The government went there and took care of the problem, but it turns out that many of those prisoners escaped it, and some of them have been found here in the U.S. So it's not a big stretch to believe, just like what Castro did back many years ago, that some of his members were purposely let go from Venezuela in order to wreak chaos into the U.S.
May I add something to that?
Please.
Yes, I think what you said about the Maduro regime stopping all of the deportation flights to take place from the U.S. to Venezuela, I think that's the most clear example that we can find to demonstrate that Maduro is actually provoking most of these massive migration to cause troubles here in the U.S. and to use that as a coin, as an exchange coin to gain political favors for his regime. Listen, I have an empathetic heart for all of the people that are trying to come, because so many of them probably are like me, are trying to escape a horrible situation and want just a better place to live. But at the same time, you have people that are being infiltrated, you have criminals, you have Maduro supporters, you have people that actually financially still support the regime that are trying to come here, which is, it's crazy. I mean, we need to have screening. We need to know exactly who is coming here and why and under what reasons. And we cannot have that kind of screening if we have an open border like what we have right now. So it's a really complicated situation, and I don't believe the Biden administration has the tools to actually fix anything.
So you both ended up coming to America, and what was the process for each of you in doing that?
Well, in my case, I arrived here in January 12th of 2019. 2018 was the year where I finished college. I was like basically every college student in Venezuela. You finish and you have no north of where you're supposed to. I studied international relations. I was supposed to be in the foreign service in Venezuela. And my offers were very limited. And I was in a very dark spot. One of my best friends told me, hey, you should apply to a internship in the U.S. Sure, let's do it. And I never came to the U.S. before. And for me, it was like, let's try, let's do it. I applied for it. I got approved in November of 2018 for that internship in Cato. In the process in Venezuela, we have the consulate. You have to do your visa screening. I have an internship visa. So I got approved, thanks to God. And I came here in January of 2019. And 1 week after I arrived here is when Juan Guaido started doing his movement in Venezuela. If you remember Juan Guaido, which to a lot of people already forget, mostly to blame for him. And all the embassies and consulates were closed in Venezuela because we broke diplomatic relations with them. So in my case, with that opportunity that I had to come here, I will still be there, or I will have gone somewhere else. So it was a very stroke of luck that all of that happened before the diplomatic relations finished.
For me, well, pretty similar to Andres' story. I do have to mention that in the year I came here in late 2018, and in the year 2017, I was involved in a really bad case of political persecution. Back there, I was heavily involved in the massive demonstrations that were taking place in Venezuela. And I was pretty much attending every single day, every one of these protests against the regime. We were trying, to get rid of them. And because of our actions, one of my best friends was captured. The police broke into his house in the middle of the night. They didn't have a warrant. They didn't have any kind of legality or due process, and they took him away. And when I found out that this was happening to him, I understood that I was in a real dangerous situation, because of course we were part of the same political team, and if he was being taken, that meant that the next in line in order to be captured right away was of course me. So I needed to escape from my house like in the middle of the night that very same day when that happened. I started I went into a hiding situation. I started to hiding a religious place in Venezuela. I stayed there for more than 3 months. And this was a life-changing experience for me. And later, 3 months later, my friend was, thanks God, released from prison. And I was able to resume a little bit my ordinary life in Venezuela. This allowed me to finish my law degree in Venezuela. And once I did that, of course, I stay away from all of the political activism because of the risks. They were already too high for me to afford. And once I finished my law degree, I applied to participate in an educational program named Project Arizona, which had also an internship. It had an educational experience in Phoenix and in Arizona State University. I was selected to be part of that, and that was the reason I was able to come here in the year late 2018. And I was supposed to go back as well to Venezuela, but ever since I arrived, as I said, I started to speaking out again. I regained that confidence that I lost when I was in Venezuela. So then I became a little bit public. Venezuela, everybody was talking about Venezuela when I was here because of the events with Juan Guaido, as Andres was saying. So I started to receive a lot of invitations to podcasts like this one and our student groups at ASU or, political stuff. And of course, my name started to regain a lot of notoriety. I don't know if that's a word, but yeah, I because of that, I decided to just claim asylum because I know for sure that if I go back, I go to prison. I don't want that.
What is the seeking asylum process looks like? What does that look like for you guys?
So imagine going to the DMV. So right there, you start seeing that it's terrible. You start imagine going to the DMV, and it's 10 times worse because there's no one in the DMV. It says open, wide open outside. You enter, there's no one. And you just keep going every day, and there's no one. So it's basically what we have right now. In actual technical terms, the asylum process in the U.S. has two variants. Defense and affirmative. Defense is everyone that comes through the southern border, for example, or not just the southern border. Like if you come here without a proper visa, proper document, you enter and then you claim asylum. It can also be you come in an airplane, and as soon as you put feet in the U.S., you claim asylum. So then you have to defend your case immediately against the government. Defense why you should stay. The case of Jorge and mine, of everyone that came here legally and then applied for asylum, is an affirmative asylum. So you're affirming the argument why you came here legally, but at the same time, why you should stay. So the main difference is that defense goes straight to court, immigration court. In our case, we first have to go through an administrative interview with a USCIS agent, which we have been waiting for, in my case, 5 years. So it's a process where you apply for asylum, and then you have to wait 6 months until you get a work permit. So the government is expecting you to not work for 6 months. But of course, we know that's a deterrent for people, so they don't apply because you have to work in order to survive, especially in the U.S. And then you have to wait for your interview. Some people are very lucky, and I'm talking about 1% of the cases, that you get an interview right away, 7 months after you apply. And once you pass the interview, you get asylum. If you don't pass the interview, you go to immigration court, because then you will be in removal procedures. And some people like us, like Jorge and I, and many, the vast majority, you wait 3, 5, 7, 8, 10 years for the interview. Again, this interview is just you sitting with an agent explaining everything we just told you, Vincent, and everything we have told in every single one of our presentations around the country and a book that we wrote. It's like, I think it's just one of example of how broken the immigration system is in the U.S. because you have people coming illegally that they can have papers quickly and a lot of things, and then you have other people that have to wait years and years, and you're in a limbo because you can't plan a long-term future. You can't plan a family because you don't know if maybe you get deported the next day, or a president gets to power and he will decide that everyone that is seeking asylum is they're getting denied. Who knows what's going to happen? So that's just one example of the many, many examples of why the immigration system in the U.S. is probably the most broken system in the world.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. The waiting times are crazy. I applied for asylum back in early 2019, and I'm still waiting for that first hearing to happen. My dad, his case is even worse. He claimed asylum back in 2016, if I recall correctly. He came about 2 years before me. And same thing, he is still in the same stage of the process as I am, and Andres is. It's an incredible bad system. And the issue is, and I think Trump did try to solve a little bit of, he tried to put a kind of a solution for this. A lot of people who come here and maybe they don't have like a strong asylum case, because asylum is strictly speaking for people who suffer like persecution for their political side here, or for religious belief, or for their sexuality, something like that. It's not for people who were having a bad time because of economic reasons, for example. And many people come here that they were not really politically involved, but they just, they request asylum because they know that the waiting time is so long that they take advantage of the system, and because they know that in the meantime they're going to receive a temporary work permit, which is what we have, and a temporary work social security number. So well, that's why the system is so overloaded by so many applications. I mean, yeah, I don't know what the solution is. Maybe we have to start hiring more agents to expedite these interviews or something. But it's really certainly not fair for us to be waiting this long.
You know, the average person in America has no idea what the process is for becoming a legal citizen or even seeking asylum. What we are seeing now is all we see is on the border. You know, the average person only knows like, oh, they're seeking asylum, and then boom, they're released into the country. And so that for most people is the only, you know, truth. But your truth is someone who's come to this country legally by way of different ventures, you know, the internships, education, whatever the case, holding a legal visa to be here in the country for different reasons. But then at that time seeking asylum, and now you're waiting, you know, your father's 7 years, 8 years, whatever that is, just for an interview, right? And then these other individuals, the same, were receiving a notice to appear and they're released into the country, but they've done it illegally. It definitely raises questions about our immigration system. And, you know, that is, I say it a lot, that is just one layer of a 7-layer cake of immigration issues we have in this country, right? That's just one area of concern that we need to address. You know, there's all these other different areas of the immigration process that is very complex. And man, I am sorry. You know, one thing I'm curious is, you know, if you had the opportunity to go back to your country, if your country was able to change its political leaders, if it was able to get back into the country that you believed in and that you loved, is there, you know, and there's a chance for you to go back to your country, are you interested in going back to your country and you know, raising kids and continue on in that country? Or, you know, have you come to America and just really kind of call this home now and want to stay here?
Yeah. I would say that one of my biggest dreams is actually to return there. I still have a lot of connections there. More than half of my family is still there. I love the place that I left behind, and I love the idea that eventually I would be able to have some sort of living between both places. I don't know, because I also I love America already, even though I'm not an American yet. I love the lifestyle here, and I love the friends that I have made here so far. But my heart, I believe, is still over there, and I like to eventually return to help rebuild my country. I'd like to eventually be part of a new maybe administration or something, and be someone influential out there. That's what I will always work so hard to be part of. And sadly, that doesn't seem to be the case in the near future. So I don't know if I should keep holding to those expectations any longer, because it's actually really frustrating. Years keep passing by and you don't see any kind of change coming up soon. And well, you start to get old. I'm about to get married, thanks God, in December. And yeah, thank you. So at some point you have to start thinking like, well, maybe I just have to set up in here and start building something here, which is basically what I'm doing right now. But yeah, in my mind and in my heart, I always want to, you know, return there and help my nation to be a prosperous nation as it once was.
Absolutely. Andres?
You know, one of the only things that sometimes makes me wake up in the middle of the night sweating cold and, you know, with my heavy breathing is because I have a nightmare that I went to Venezuela and I couldn't leave. So no, in my case, I wouldn't come back to Venezuela. I feel that everything that I knew, the Venezuelan only that I grew up with, how that deteriorated over time, it completely destroyed my future. It completely destroyed my family. The notion of a family, the notion of what you have, it was absolutely destroyed in less than a generation from what, for example, my mom built in Venezuela, which was amazing. Venezuela that she lived in the 70s and 80s was amazing. But the thing is, like in Venezuelan history, right before my mom, in the 50s, we have another dictatorship. So do I want my kids to go through that? Absolutely not. So the moment I came to the U.S., I knew that the person I was left back in Venezuela. And I basically was reborn when I came here. And from here, believe it or not, I've been able to help more people from Venezuela that I could have ever been staying there. I have helped friends come here through legal means like this humanitarian process that was implemented a few months ago. I have helped friends leave the country and go somewhere else. Me and my sister, she's a refugee in Costa Rica, we basically maintain the whole family, sending money all the time, and they can live a decent life that they wouldn't have been able with a Venezuelan income. So even if Venezuela tomorrow decides to leave the regime behind and we have an absolute capitalist country that completely change everything, and if I go back, I will get, a position somewhere, I wouldn't care, because I want my children to have the future in a way that they can go anywhere they can, anywhere they wanted to go, and have the life that they can. And I feel like that's something you can have here in America that you can't in Venezuela, even if things will go very well. And let's remember, the damage that the regime has done in Venezuela is a completely generational damage. There is children that are not eating well, children that are not having the education, that it doesn't matter what happens with the regime, those children are going to have a very rough life in the future. So it's not an issue that is going to be solved in 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's the same thing that you're looking in Cuba. If Castro leaves Cuba, the whole regime leaves Cuba tomorrow, that doesn't mean the country is going to go well. Now, in Venezuela, that's never going to change. But I do think, like many Venezuelans actually did in the past, let's remember that the independence of Venezuela started in a meeting in New York City. It didn't start in Venezuela. I think that way more for my country being outside and at the same time keeping my family safe.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's something beautiful about America. There's something that happens here in this country that doesn't happen almost anywhere else, is that when you come to this country, and it doesn't matter which color, race, culture, it doesn't matter. Once you become naturalized and become a citizen, you're American. You know what I mean? And you do that in any other country, it doesn't happen. You can go to China, you're always going to be a foreigner to them, to anyone there. If you go to Britain, you're a foreigner there. You go to other countries, but in America, it doesn't matter which race, culture, color, and it doesn't matter what it is. When you come to America and you claim this as your country, you're an American. You know, this beautiful thing about America. And so I absolutely love that your guys' testament to that. And, the process of becoming a citizen, the process of just seeking asylum is so challenging. And, I think it's only important for us to be able to highlight those things. The other thing that I find is fascinating, that some reason in America, there's a big group of individuals that push heavily for socialism. And I would love to, before we wrap this up, really hear your case on how that socialism lifestyle would be detrimental to America, if that's what you believe, and why you speak so proudly against socialism publicly.
Definitely. I mean, the first things that socialists are going to do is they are going to start attacking property rights, private property rights. And basically, when you lose private property rights, you stop being a free individual. You cannot call yourself a free individual if you're not able to do with your property that begins exactly with your own body. If you cannot decide what to do with it, if you cannot decide what I'm going to do with my own business, I cannot create my own business, for example. If you don't have a strong currency that because it loses so much value because of inflation, because the government keeps spending so much, giving away free stuff, which is something that is unfortunate. It's kind of happening right now in the U.S. It's not at the same pace as we saw in Venezuela, but we're slowly getting there. We see how the government keeps spending more and more and more, and then the deficit keeps growing and the debt keeps growing. So I do believe that in the distant future, or maybe not so distant actually, if we keep following these wrong ideas, if we stop following the free market institutions that guided this country for so long, well, we're going to see ourselves in a really, really bad economic situation. And that's why I got involved with TPUSA and the Fund for American Studies to start speaking about these issues. As Andres said, we visited more than 30 countries across the states, visiting college campuses and sometimes even high schools to speak about this. Right now, I'm part of another network of speakers named the Dissident Project. We do exactly the same thing, but focusing on high schools. We visit all of high schools across the states to speak about our own life, to speak about how socialism destroyed our nation, how to speak about the dangers of that idea that having free stuff coming from the government sounds good, but it's actually really, really harmful for our country in the mid and long term. So that's what I have been doing ever since I arrived to the States. And why am I doing it? Because I love the States. I love the United States. I love what I found here. I love the opportunities that I found here. And I'm really sure that if we start following the wrong ideas, I'm going to see myself in a really bad path. Exactly like how we saw it in Venezuela, or where we saw it everywhere else, where socialism or communism has been implemented, right? Right now, I also work for Turning Point USA. I'm their field representative here in South Florida, so I'm in charge of recruiting college kids and bringing educational events to their college campuses and doing good activities to speak about the importance of individual liberty, free market capitalism, of protect the Second Amendment, First Amendment. I mean, all of those great values that make America what it is and why America is so great in front of the eyes of the world, right? So I think that's my final message.
Yeah, it's amazing that you do that, and you're still in the process of seeking asylum. You do much currently for this country to educate, to continue to push this country forward, and you're still in the process of seeking asylum.
I see it as my retribution, as my way of saying thank you to this beautiful nation that took me in. I feel like I already owe so much to all Americans because they gave me a place where I could be me, where I could be free, where I could start building my life. And that's something that unfortunately I didn't have in Venezuela. I almost lost my life there, actually. And then I was able to be reborn, as Andres said, here in the U.S.
I want to focus on the outcome of what happens when socialism is implemented. And in 2012, Hugo Chavez, the late Venezuelan dictator, his final campaign slogan was, in his rallies, he will tell people, hey, Vincent, hey, Jorge, hey, Andres, you're no longer Vincent, you're no longer Jorge. You're now Chavez. Maria, now you're Chavez, whatever. And people, you can see the rally, you can find them online. People were so excited. They were like, yeah, everyone is Chavez, we're Chavez, blah, blah, blah. And that slogan encompasses everything that socialism is about. It's about removing the identity that you have, removing who you are, and who could you be, in order to give you a supplemented identity in order to control you. And I don't want that to happen in the U.S. I don't want that to happen anywhere. Because here in the U.S., when I say reborn, I actually mean it. Like, the person that you can become in the U.S. is whoever you want it to be. There's endless cases of people that have gone deeply into drugs and they find their way out here that they maybe couldn't have found the way out somewhere else, because there's so many tools that can get you out of here. Not only economic tools, religious tools, community tools that you don't find somewhere else, because there's not a free market that allows all of those tools to flourish. There's people that can go deep in depth and find their way out. People that took their wrong path in life and still found the right path. In Venezuela, you graduate today from college. It doesn't matter what profession you decide. What you're going to end up doing in Venezuela is not what you dream of, because you don't have dreams. So having that vision of what happened there and how deep in that darkness I was when I was living there is the main reason I don't want to go back. I don't want anyone to have to go through that anywhere else in the world. That's why we did all the speeches here in the U.S. That's now why I focus in politics, in trying to elect people that are going to take us away from those kind of policies. Because it's not just the economic policy, it's not just all of that. The price controls and everything. It's the outcome of the end result that socialists want, is to remove anyone who you think you're going to be and just become their puppet. And that's a very terrible place to be in life. When you wake up or you go to sleep, and whatever dream you may think, something you saw in the movies that you want from yourself, a car, a credit card. I have my first credit card here. I bought my first phone here in the US. Anything that you think is basic in any other country, you will not have it under socialism.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear, and I think a lot of young Americans think socialism is the fair choice for people. It sounds fair and it sounds more balanced and it sounds more equal. But from watching from the outside looking, if we use Venezuela as a case study, it's kind of scary. And I sit in a position here watching kind of how the changes of America has happened throughout the years. And I don't, I think, Jorge, you said it best. I don't know how close we are to potentially being a society that votes more towards socialism. And that's scary. It's a scary thought. And I hope that people listen to this podcast or watch this podcast, they take your words to heart and they understand this is two gentlemen who have tried to speak up against a political tyrant who has then turned around and threatened their lives. and has destroyed a country from two people who have lived a life and trying to fight for good for their people, has now had to find themselves here in America seeking asylum, and in this country doing great things for our own people and still fighting to become a citizen, to become welcomed into this own country. I find it's heart-wrenching in a way. And, you know, I have nothing but empathy for you guys, and I have nothing but appreciation and gratitude for people who are like you, who have seen the persecutions in life and who are standing up and speaking out publicly for that, for the people. It's important to have that, and I genuinely appreciate your guys' time today.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for your invitation. Okay.
Thank you for listening to Borderland, an Ironclad original. After listening to these two gentlemen who have strong activist hearts, I learned a lot today. I learned a lot about what the struggles are in that country. I had no idea, and some of the reasons why we have a massive influx of Venezuelan immigrants who are seeking asylum. I think it's important for all of us to better understand why the push and pull of illegal migration is so massive currently at this moment. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And I would say that we'd almost have to look deeper into each country and seeing why there is a push and pull. What is the political nature that is happening? What is the potential crisis that are happening in those countries? And not just their countries. Why are they so drawn to ours? I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. I know I did. And stay tuned for next week.